Hi, this is Pat. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I wanted to show you what I'm doing with this vintage quilt top that has some fabric that is disintegrating. I had bought this vintage top years ago and it had a different sashing, but that was falling apart. So I took it out and used just white cotton fabric for sashing. And then it sat in the closet for a long time. And I took it out and thought, okay, I need to quilt this. But then I found that some of this fabric is just disappearing because that was brown ink and it has eaten through the fabric. And so I didn't want to quilt that. So I started appliquing squares over this to correct the issue, to cover these up, to stabilize things. But the more I worked on it, the more I realized it wasn't just this one fabric. There was a lot of fabric that was thin. So I started taking it apart. And as I tried to take it apart, more fabric just ripped. It doesn't take a lot of effort to tear it. Most of this, it just comes apart. There was quite a bit of it. I found some with small holes in it. This fabric here is very, very thin and fragile. So I just took it apart. I decided that's the best option. Here's a few more blocks. You can see again, something has to be under this or over this. Another block. This one I had at some point taken apart and put this new fabric in it. Here's another one I had put new fabric over this red and white checked that was torn. But, the seams weren't holding up good because the fabric is so worn out. It was just going to be a disaster. But there's some cute blocks in here and some cute fabrics. So what I'm doing is I'm making a stitch journal cover, or a journal cover. It may not be stitch journal inside, but I used 2 blocks with a piece of sashing. Now this block is one I had repaired. I had appliqued over the fabric, that fabric with the brown outline of the flowers. And then I basted it to a piece of plain muslin. I used what's called invisible baste or prick stitch, and that the big stitches of the basting, if you're familiar with basting, is on the back. And I don't have to take that out because you can't really see the stitches on the front where I basted it. They just barely are there. You could baste it on the front if you wanted to, and then take it out later. But I find this a lot easier, and of course it's a lot easier than using straight pins or safety pins. You don't have to worry about your thread getting hung up on it. Then I started stitching. I am using running stitch. I'm using a variety of threads. This brown and this yellow are 12 weight thread that I've used before for hand quilting. This is hand quilting thread. Then over here, I've used 2 strands of DMC cotton floss to make some lazy daisies. That's a darning over a hole. Some little, I think these are called Algerian stars. This is I just did seed stitch. Here I drew out these lines, the squares, and then stitched on them. Used a fabric marker that disappears with water or ink. Some of it still is there, but I don't worry about if the fabric's not laying flat. I'll just keep folding and stitching, and it'll just give it more texture. And my plan is to keep going over this, keep stitching over it. This will be the spine of the book. So I think this is going to be the front. I'm not positive yet. So that's going to be the spine of the journal. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to cover this with some fabric now, and then when I sew in the pages and the signatures, which is a group of pages, to allow the stitching to be seen out here, or if I want to do the stitching of the pages and then cover it so you don't see that stitching. I haven't decided on that yet. The other thing I'm going to do, or I can do, is I can embellish this with more than just thread. First, let me show you my thread. This is Egyptian cotton 12 weight. It's by Wonderfil, Wonder F-I-L, and it's called Spaghetti, without an H in it, S-P-A-G-E-T-T-I. I had used this on another quilt that I hand quilted. It's a thick thread, so you do need a needle with a large eye. This is DMC cotton, stranded cotton. This is some waxed thread used for leather work that I had some scraps of. I may use some of that. I'm sticking with a yellow and brown theme, as you can see. I may add some blue thread. That would be, one of these blues might be, I don't know about that blue, but it would be a contrast. If I wanted some contrast to the yellow, blue would be a good choice. The other thing I'm thinking of doing is adding things like these little yo-yos, or Suffolk puffs as they're sometimes called, on here. And I even have some that are just the circles are cut out. They haven't been made into puffs. I did not make these. I inherited them in a box of fabric that my mother gave me from a friend of hers. I may take one of these large ones and they're very thin fabric. Take this circle that hasn't been gathered. Of course, there's cat hair. I have 2 cats. And maybe embroidery something on here and then blanket stitch around it. That could be, might be a little big for this cover, but it could be used for something. The other thing I can use is buttons. I have, I could use the button in the center of the puff, or I can just randomly put buttons on the front. I also have these little buttons that look like bees. I may add one of those. I have found this one in my stash, my button jar. That is a sunflower. These are larger buttons. I don't have it handy, but I also have some vintage buttons that I could use. I have brown buttons as well. So I could use a brown button, or I could put the brown button in the center of the flower. So that, you know, just different things to make it look decorative. Those are some of my options. I could use other colored buttons as well, but those, I'm thinking more of the yellow and browns. The other thing I could use for trim is, I have some rickrack here. I have this tiny rickrack. I get a lot of things like this at thrift stores. Sometimes there'll be like grab bags of sewing supplies. This one costs 39 cents, so it's been around for a while. But I could use this. I may put rickrack here along this edging. That could also be a way that if I do the stitching in the fabrics and I want to cover it up, those stitching lines, I could use this wide rickrack that is a zigzag. Oh, I'm sorry, I hit the camera, I hit the light. Here's another trim I found in a box of trims. That's kind of cool. It's a little shiny, so I don't know if I want to use that one or not. Here are some vintage buttons that are rather large. I also have bias seam binding. This is acetate, so it's going to be a little shiny. Again, it was something that has been around for a while. This is lace. It was hem facing to be used on the hem of a dress. It's also been, you know, oh, it's 1980. It's 45 years old. I have ribbon, like you buy at the craft stores. This is 1/8 of an inch wide. Obviously, you can get it in different colors if you wanted to add ribbon. The ribbon I would probably couch down, and then I would lay it down and sew back and forth across it. I have some other ribbon probably won't use football ribbon, but this wide ribbon. Here's some other lacy looking, laced edge ribbon. I have strips of fabric, other strips of yellow fabric I could patchwork on here, or I could use to cover up the binding, I keep calling it a binding, it's not the binding, it's the spine. I could use it to cover up the spine and just straight stitch across it, do a running stitch across it. I also have cheesecloth, which would add some texture. It would also kind of make that white fabric look not quite so white, but look a little bit more subdued, or even over this. I might do that. This is some cheesecloth that I eco-dyed, or I don't know, or tea dyed, or used some rust dyeing. Kind of takes away from that brightness of the white if you don't want that look, and then that just gives it a little different texture. Here's another piece of cheesecloth that was dyed with, I don't know, maybe onion skins. But again, that, just, or you can, the other thing with cheesecloth is you can wad it up and sew it down to make it look like, if it's a bright color, it would look like a flower, or you can twist it and couch it down to use as some sort of, it gives a lot of texture, but it gives it a whole different look. It looks like the edge of a book, of a fancy book. I think that's all I have. Yeah, I have more. I could use this orange floss or white floss as well. So that's my plan. I don't think I mentioned this, but since I want this as a cover, a lot of slow stitch doesn't have batting in it, but I want this as the cover, so I want it to have a little structure. So I used plain, what we call muslin here in the States. I think in England they may call it calico. But you could use part of a bed sheet. You could use any fabric you wanted. You could use a print here as well, and then let your stitching, still let your stitching show. Or if it was a print, the stitching may not show as much. And then a scrap of batting, or in the UK, I believe you call it wadding. I think this is cotton. It came out of, again, my scrap bag of batting. So it looks like it has a scrim on it. I can't decide if that's just a scrim to hold it together or if it's fusible, and I haven't tested it. And then I laid this on and basted it, and then I started my stitching. So I'm going to do a lot more stitching. I want it to have a lot of texture from the stitching, like you see here. I want that throughout the whole thing. Like I said, I need to decide what I'm going to do with the spine. But yeah, I have a lot more stitching to do. I don't necessarily have to do it that close together. So I've just done running stitches. I may do some running stitches and then do like a whip stitch. I may do a line of chain stitching, or just random chain stitching, individual chains. I did these X's here. I'm not doing any fancy embroidery stitches, but you could. You could do a lot more fancier ones. You can make different shapes if you wanted to embroider flowers or bees or birds on it, or even initials if I wanted to put my initials on it, or any other, or words that are meaningful to me or to this journal. I could put that on there. So once I finish stitching it, I'm not sure how I'm going to do the edges. I don't think I'm going to bind them like you would bind the edge of a quilt. I may just trim it up, even it up, and do a blanket stitch around with a heavy thread or multiple strands of cotton floss. Or I may do just kind of turn it, remove some of the batting, turn this inside and stitch it down so it will look like this. And you don't see from the outside what's going on there. But once it's a book, it'll be like this. You open it up and there'll be pages here. I may just leave this uncovered, but it's very likely that once I finish it, I will put a piece of fabric here to cover up the stitching. I'll just kind of applique it on top. That might be a piece that I've patchworked together so that I can, cover this. Some people like to see the back of their stitching. I haven't decided if I want to keep this or not. I said I'm not sure. So if you liked what you saw, please give me a thumbs up and click subscribe. Leave me any comments below that you might have about this, and I will keep you updated on the progress. Thanks. Have a good day.